Wan Ho for her statement. I now call Ms. Mariama Ngum to the podium. You have the floor, madam.
Mr. President, honorable members of the court, good afternoon. It is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the Republic of the Gambia. I will continue the Gambia's presentation of evidence by discussing Mongnu, another village in northern Rakhine State, where Myanmar engaged in horrific acts of violence and labeled it clearance operation. My colleagues described the acts of genocide that took place in Mingi and Chutping. I will address how, on 27 August 2017, Myanmar security forces also launched a large-scale attack in Mongnu against innocent, unarmed Rohingya civilians. As the evidence will demonstrate, what occurred in Mongnu was not an isolated event. It was deliberate, organized assault that closely mirrored the pattern of clearance operation carried out in other villages across northern Rakhine State. The reports of the UN fact-finding mission, multiple witness testimonies, and other independent investigations show that the clearance operation in Mongnu followed the same modus operandi and resulting in the same devastating consequences: indiscriminate attacks, the separation and killing of men and boys, the widespread sexual violence against women and girls, and the burning of homes to erase Rohingya from Myanmar's maps. Mr. President, honorable members of the court, Myanmar conducted a brutal clearance operation in Mongnu. As shown on the screens before you, Mongnu, known in Rohingya as Monupara, is located in Budidong Township within the Chindamar village tract. Prior to August 2017, Mongnu was home to roughly 400 Rohingya households. In the days before the clearance operation, the population increased as residents from nearby Pongtampeng fled in Mongnu, seeking safety after a similar operation there 2 days earlier. Many believed that they would be protected if they sheltered in a prominent compound at the heart of the village, a place owned by families known to have long-standing ties with the security forces. They were wrong. What followed on 27 August was a carefully orchestrated attack that unfolded with chilling predictability. The clearance operation in Mongnu resembled those in other villages in 4 important aspects. First, the Third Madaw's operation in Mongnu likewise involved indiscriminate attacks against Rohingya civilians, including children. According to the UN fact-finding mission, upon arriving at Mongnu, the Third Madaw split in coordinated squads and advanced into the village on foot, rounding up the villagers. Several witnesses identified the soldiers as being from the 564th Light Infantry Battalion. Since the military bases had long operated near the village, certain soldiers were known and readily recognizable by the residents. The soldiers opened fire on fleeing villagers as they moved inward into the village. As one witness testified in a signed statement, the military started firing as they made a circle inside the village and brought all the people to the place where they were killed. Another witness described how the military surrounded the village from all sides and started firing. In the witness's words, and I quote, "When they found the people in front of them in the village, they killed them," close quote. The troops converged on the compound where Rohingya were gathered. They then pounded on doors, ordering people to come out of the house and threatening to set the houses on fire. Once the doors were forced open, soldiers burst inside and fired, kicking out those who were screaming and trying to escape. One witness describes how those in houses heard the sounds of guns, the sounds of bullets, which went on and on. Another woman recounted how the soldiers methodically killed those in the houses. They first opened fire, and then when the people were weak, they mutilated the bodies with long knives. The gunfire did not spare children. Multiple witnesses reported to the UN fact-finding mission that during this encounter, a young child was struck in the head by a bullet fired by the military and died shortly afterward. A witness testified in his signed statement that a 10-year-old boy was hit and his brain came out from his head. Second, as elsewhere, the Tad Madao in Mognu singled out men and boys and killed them in deliberate, organized manner. Once inside the compound, the soldiers separated the men from the larger group of civilians. The women and children were locked in similar houses where screams could be heard. The men and boys were beaten, bound, and dragged into the shared courtyard. They were then lined up in smaller groups and ordered to kneel or lie face down. According to eyewitnesses, the soldiers took the men out of the house and tied them up, their hands behind their back with a rope or with headscarves. Soldiers forced them to lie with their chests and face down on the ground. One interviewee described to Amnesty International that the soldiers forced him to lie down in the courtyard and kicked him right by his left eye before tying up his hands with a rope, while repeatedly calling him and his brother, Kalar. One of the men who owned the compound, Zahid Hussein, was among the first to be killed. He was stabbed to death in the stomach, while two soldiers restrained him. After Zahid Hussein was stabbed, he was heard screaming that everyone should come out of the house because the soldiers were going to burn it down. Hearing his scream, two of his sons came out, but both of them were shot dead. The soldiers then proceeded to execute the remaining men and boys who were either kneeling or laying face down on the ground with their hands tied. According to eyewitness accounts, prior to the execution, a soldier from the 564th Light Infantry Battalion was heard speaking on the phone in the courtyard. He was heard asking, "Boss, we have caught 87 people. What should we do?" He was heard asking. At the end of the call, the soldier turned to the others and relayed the order. "We killed them." What followed were summary executions carried out systematically, victim by victim, with guns and knives. That killing en masse is corroborated by multiple witness statements and reports, including from the UN fact-finding mission, Human Rights Watch, the Associated Press, Fortified Rights, and Amnesty International. Quoting the words of one interviewee, the UN mission reported that some of the men and boys were shot first and their throats were slit with a knife. Others just had their throats slit. One survivor told Fortified Rights that the soldiers took away people in groups of 2 and 3, and one by one hacked on the back of their necks. Another witness, interviewed by the International State Crime Initiative of the Queen Mary University, described how a soldier from the 564th Battalion put a knife to the temples of the victims and used it to cut the back of their necks, while other victims were shot at close range by others behind them. Several of those in the courtyard were young children who were stabbed to death. One woman described how the Tatmadaw killed her male family members, and I quote, "The courtyard was full of blood. They killed my husband, my father-in-law, and my 2 nephews of 15 and 8 years old. They even killed the child in the same manner," close quote. Some men were led from the courtyard to a nearby scrubland and murdered there. Another woman, 50 years old resident, described how the soldiers grabbed as many as they could and found in front of them, adding that, "My people were taken like this from the house to the edge of the hillside and shot." In a signed statement, one witness whom the court will call next week recounted how he nearly escaped death that day. His hands had been bound as he waited as the military began to take groups of 5 to 6 people to another place to kill them. He watched in terror as the military seized his 80-year-old father, who was executed and placed atop of a pile of dead bodies. When the soldiers ordered his group to stand, the witness broke free and fled. He was struck in the arm by a bullet but survived, and now appears to testify in these proceedings before this honorable court. Third, the clearance operation in Mongnu also involved brutal sexual assault and violence, including rape. Women fleeing from gunfire were seized, stripped, and subjected to body searches that devolved into sexual assault. Some were raped, and others were mutilated and killed. One survivor recounted to the UN fact-finding mission how, as she fled towards the hills to escape the shooting, soldiers caught her and gang-raped her in her husband's presence. In her words, and I quote, "3 members of the military took me. One man held me down and pushed me to the ground. They tore off my clothes. 2 men raped me. My husband could still see me," close quote. The witness was not alone. According to her, the Tatmadaw took many other women, maybe around 10 to 20 women at different times. She saw those women being raped as well. Another witness who was hiding behind described a woman being violently killed by being stabbed in her genitals. Myanmar dismisses these accounts as being uncorroborated. In doing so, Myanmar simply ignores the clear determination by the UN fact-finding mission, based on multiple eyewitness accounts, that the women and girls were also gang-raped and killed and mutilated in Mongnu. The sexual violence in Mongnu was not limited to acts of rape. When separating women from the men, the soldiers stripped women naked, took any valuable items, and ripped off their headscarves. Based on multiple interviews with women from Pongtamping and Mongnu, Amnesty International reported that many women were sexually assaulted during these body searches for valuables. Fourth, as in other villages, the clearance operation in Mongnu culminated in the destruction of Rohingya homes and the concealment and removal of bodies. UNISAD analysis of satellite imagery confirmed that in both Mongnu and neighboring Pongtamping, more than 300 structures were destroyed by fire. Witness accounts confirmed that the Tatmadaws used launchers to burn the houses. After executing the men and boys, soldiers were seen moving bodies from the courtyard into military trucks, which drove to the nearby army base. Other soldiers were seen burying bodies into shallow pits nearby. Human Rights Watch similarly reported in October 2017 that the soldiers were seen gathering the bodies on green tarps and loading them into pushcarts before taking them to military vehicles. Witnesses who returned to the village after the clearance operation saw body parts, including those of children, scattered on the ground, which felt sticky from blood. One witness recalled that the field was streaked with blood. There were trails of it on the ground, the trees, everywhere. Those witness accounts are corroborated by video footage and photograph analyzed by the UN fact-finding mission, showing patches of blood near the compound and tarpaulin bags buried just below the surface, with a decomposing human leg visibly protruding from one of the bags. Given the destruction of the village and the disposal of bodies, the precise death toll is difficult to ascertain. Various sources have estimated that approximately 100 to 200 people were killed in Mongnu during the clearance operation on 27 August. Based on nearly 20 interviews with witnesses as well as its own review of several videos filmed in the aftermath of the clearance operation, Amnesty International reported that on 27 August, Myanmar soldiers summarily executed some of the men and boys in Mongnu, calling it a massacre. Mr. President, honorable members of the court, Myanmar's counterterrorism narrative does not account for the extreme brutality and the pervasive sexual violence in Mongnu. Myanmar does not dispute that the Tatmadaws conducted a clearance operation in Mongnu. Instead, Myanmar predictably asserts that the operation was purportedly necessitated by ARSA attacks and alleges that the Gambia omitted from its narrative the textual details that demonstrate that the clearance operation was in fact a counterterrorism operation. The textual details that Myanmar considers relevant to what transpired in Mongnu are embodied in two self-justifying sources of evidence. One, the Tatmadaws daily operation report, and two, the Ministry of Defense internal table prepared for this litigation, documenting the clashes between ARSA and the security forces, which are at annexes 118 and 149 of Myanmar's counter memorial. At most, they refer to ARSA-related activities in other locations surrounding Mongnu, such as Putamping, Ganyang Chong, approximately 10 to 12 kilometers to the north, and Mongi Tong, approximately 5 kilometers to the southwest. With respect to Mongnu, the Tatmadaws operation report on your screens merely states that upon receiving the report that ARSA terrorists who had attacked Pongtamping police outpost 2 days earlier were suspected to be hiding in Mongnu, the 564th Battalion and Border Guard police arrived at the village around 10 a.m. Upon arriving, the security forces immediately carried out an outer perimeter security action, while another group carried out the security operation in the village. The Tatmadaws report then notes that at 13:15 p.m., hours after the Myanmar security forces had already arrived and began conducting the clearance operation, they were attacked by a group of Bengali terrorists, prompting the security forces to fight back. Characteristically, as was the case with other villages, Myanmar's government's report include no details of what the Tatmadaw did during the clearance operation, including the modus operandi described in the fact-finding mission reports or by the eyewitnesses in their sworn statements. The Tatmadaws reports are silent on the indiscriminate shooting at civilians, the systematic execution of men and boys, the rape and gang rape of women and girls, and the burning of homes and razing of villages. That absence, honorable members of the court, it's telling. It shows why it is difficult to place any evidentiary weight on these self-serving reports. But even if one assumes that the reports are true and that takes them at face value, they only show that the purported ARSA attack occurred several hours after the security forces had already entered the village, encircled civilians, and begun their violent sweep. In other words, even on Myanmar's evidence, the Tatmadaw did not arrive at Monnu in military trucks on 27 August in response to the ARSA attack. It deliberately chose to conduct a clearance operation based on an uncorroborated suspicion that ARSA members could be hiding around the village. Myanmar's attempt to retroactively justify its violence based on an alleged clash that was reported hours in the pre-planned raid is simply not credible. Myanmar has no explanation for the extreme brutality and sexual violence during the clearance operation itself. It merely speculates that those who fled from Pontamping to Mongnu would inevitably have included many ARSA terrorists, which likely explain the intensity of the subsequent clashes in Mongnu. Using the same logic or illogic, Myanmar does not dispute the high death toll in Mongnu, but notes that it is unknown how many of these are ARSA fighters or supporters. That rationale, honorable members of the court, does not even come close to justify the attacks against unarmed and defenseless civilians and the atrocities that were committed against them in Mongnu. What it reveals is that, for Myanmar, the unverified suspicion that ARSA members might be present in the village gave it a license to treat every Rohingya civilian, the men and boys who were executed, and the women and girls who were subjected to sexual violence as legitimate targets. Myanmar's response to the high death toll in Mongnu likewise underscored the indefensibility of its position. From Myanmar's perspective, the Tatmadaws could kill first and rationalize later, invoking the intentionally broad and indiscriminate notion of ARSA and its supporters. The explanation that those who were killed were ARSA fighters or supporters also collapses entirely when confronted with the facts of how the clearance operation was concluded. Soldiers made no effort to identify the combatants or terrorists or sympathizers among the men and boys whom they rounded up and executed, or among the women and girls whom they raped, mutilated, and killed. Finally, Myanmar discredits that the evidence that the Gambia relies on, asserting that it is untested and mostly based on anonymous hearsay accounts. That sweeping assertion is untenable at the outset. The Gambia's evidence is diverse, independently corroborated, and mutually reinforcing. The various sources of evidence include not only eyewitness accounts and satellite imagery compiled by the UN fact-finding missions, detailed findings, but also several independent reports from organizations such as Amnesty International, Fortified Rights, the International State Crime Initiative, and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, as well as multiple signed witness statements. While some witness accounts are anonymized, reflecting the imperative to protect victims and other at-risk sources, they themselves are corroborated by multiple signed witness statements. As to the signed witness statements, Myanmar asserts that those are unreliable, primarily because, and I quote, they are silent, as to the activities of ARSA activities. In a similar vein, Myanmar claims that the Gambia deliberately omitted 2 first-hand testimonies from fortified rights and purportedly corroborates aspects of the Thad Madao's operation report concerning the terrorist activity near Mongnu. Contrary to Myanmar's assertion, the 2 first-hand testimonies were not addressed because they are not directly relevant, as neither discusses the clearance operation in Mongnu to begin with. They simply refer to ARSA activities in other locations in Budidong Township, and where they do, they only contradict Myanmar's accounts of the Thad Madao's clearance operation as an allegedly limited and proportionate response to the imminent security threats. The first testimony is from a resident of Tong Bazar village, who describes how the following report of a bomb nearby Tinganad village. The military came to the village and arrested and beat people. Importantly, the witness adds that some of the military set houses on fire and arrested and killed young people, including the witnesses' 3 children, all younger than 10 years, who were forced to lie down on the ground while the military cut the backs of their necks. Myanmar makes no mention of these details in its rejoinder while addressing the witness statement. The second testimony, which is from the resident of Min Kwang Guan Suan village, mentions that there was a clash in Pontamping. The witness describes how the attackers had only sticks and knives, and how the entire village was burned down by the Thad Madao. Those details are omitted by Myanmar in its rejoinder. As such, even the first-hand testimonies that Myanmar relies on to frame events ultimately corroborates the Gambia's evidence that the Thad Madao burned Rohingya houses and inflicted extreme brutality on civilians, despite the limited rudimentary force of the attackers. In the rejoinder, Myanmar presents 2 IIMM witness statements, which purportedly supports its account of ARSA activities and presence in Mongnu. In fact, both statements reinforce the Gambia's case. The statement by witness P1496, a 48-year-old man, does nothing to contradict the Gambia's account of the clearance operation on 27 August. The witness accounts of ARSA activities surrounding the village are expressly limited to those in the months before 27 August. And the witness explains that during the clearance operation itself, he stayed in the neighboring village, collecting information from survivors and learning about who lived and who died, including from the mass killing of people in the compound. The statement by witness P2892, a 43-year-old woman, likewise only recounts hearing gunshots from Pontamping and makes no mention of ARSA activities in Mongnu. As to the events of 27 August, the statement corroborates the Gambia's account on various fronts. The witness describes how the soldiers arrived at the village and started firing in the direction of terrified villagers who were fleeing towards the hills, and recounts how the soldiers stripped women of their valuables by inappropriately touching their private parts and putting their hands on their whole body. We conclude by noting that, as the case for other villages, Myanmar's criticism reflects a tendency to pick at nits, avoiding the core substance and ignoring the convergent picture that emerged when the evidence on Mongnu is viewed cumulatively. When assessed as a whole, the evidence concerning the clearance operation on 27 August forms a compelling narrative that aligns with a broader, well-documented pattern of conduct in other Rohingya villages across Rakhine State indiscriminate attacks on civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, the separation and execution of men and boys, sexual violence against women and girls, and the burning of Rohingya homes and destruction of their villages. In sum, the destruction of Rohingya as a group. Honorable members of the court, I thank you for your kind attention and respectfully request that Mr. Charles Kombenjai be called to the podium to continue the Gambia's submission.